Arvid Kahl in the house. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with you after all the little chats on Twitter. So it's really nice.
No,
Nice to be here.
I have all kinds of things going on Twitter, so there's always like a little bit of compliments going on. Then I think one day I just went like
Hmm.
completely like the other end of the thing. I'm like, no, this is how. And the Twitter I think brings out a lot of this out of us. So as a platform, but fascinating to
Hmm.
have you here and have conversations. I think when I resumed Twitter some months back, you were one of the first people who I actually came across, and I just really
Oh,
enjoyed your content and seeing how you were engaging with people. And then of course we did the 100 book thing.
yeah, that was awesome.
So your book
That was really cool.
anniversary, yeah. And then I just like really sort of consumed a lot of content and got to know a little bit from far, but got to know you a little bit.
Hmm.
And just thought it would be great to hear from you and share with our your audience that's here, who's whether they're here or whether they join us in the future, but about like your story. You've built a few little things here and there which have done which have done well,
Hmm.
and then and then there's but that's not just one thing, because you've then gone on
Right.
from just the, let's say, the startup thing, but then you've also then gone ahead with the books, and now I think there's permanent link is what you were looking at. You
Hmm.
built a little bit of that, and we're experimenting with,
Yeah.
and you have a unique take with the audience first approach, and all of that, which isn't as unique if you look at it, because it's obviously simple but not practiced as
Yeah.
much. So it'll be great to hear from you about what you have to say. So after this long thing, I'll just leave it to you to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, you. Thanks so much for the introduction. I mean, you already touched on almost all the points, right? Used to be a software engineer, built SaaS businesses first for other people. Then I started and failed trying to build them for myself. And then at some point, I actually figured it out with the help of my girlfriend, who had an actual problem that I could help her
Ah,
solve.
uh-huh.
And then other people had the exact same problem,
Hmm.
which is where FeedbackPanda came from, which was a little SaaS business that we built for online English teachers who were teaching English to kids in China. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It was pre-pandemic, but it was almost the same as then everybody had to move towards during the pandemic, which was like teaching online, working online, that kind of stuff. So we had some pre-pandemic success with that. Pandemic it had a large impact on all these businesses, so we sold just a couple months before it started.
Hmm.
We sold the business after 2 years of building it. It was around $55,000 monthly recurring revenue, so it
Right.
was a hefty chunk of money for us.
Hmm.
Catapulted us into some sort of financial independence,
Right.
which was really nice. And ever since then, I've been trying to give back, because like all this stuff that I've been building in the last couple of years, either like win or fail, doesn't
Hmm.
really matter. I didn't do that all by myself, right? There was always somebody else in there, either people building it with me or the people who taught me what I needed to learn to be able to do it. So I always feel I was standing on the shoulders of giants all the time. Like there was never anything that I did that was exclusively me. It
Hmm.
was always impacted or guided by somebody else. And I figured that now that I was in this much more stable position in my life,
Hmm.
now I could try to be that giant for somebody
Right.
else. I just attempt to give them as much guidance as I received during all these many years of building my own stuff. So yeah, turned from engineer to entrepreneur to writer, and now I'm all three,
Hmm.
kind of, and I really enjoy it. I spend most of my time in a day on Twitter.
Hmm.
That's kind of what I'm doing right now. I mean, obviously, you mentioned Permanent Link. That's a little SaaS business that I built,
Hmm.
but it's such a specific solution to such a specific problem. In a way, it's like I'm a writer. I have ebooks. I have links in ebooks, and links go bad because some things break on the internet. And Permanent Link is a solution that continuously checks those links, and if they fail, it automatically redirects people who go to the link to an internet archive version of that,
Hmm.
like web the back way back machine
Hmm.
on the internet. It's
Hmm.
really they have a copy of this and I automatically redirect. Very specific solution to a problem that I have
Hmm.
figured out. Other writers have the same. I have a couple of customers. It's not the biggest SaaS in the world, and it's barely profitable. And it's an experiment because
Right.
I wanted to keep building stuff while I was writing about building stuff. It's
Hmm.
this kind of
Hmm.
dog fooding mentality because I'm not a big fan of the gurus, like
Mm,
obviously the word guru has a very different meaning in different parts of the world.
mm,
I'm just using the Western one, which is like this person that has like an overly strong impact on the minds in a particular community,
mm,
not always for the best, like people who enrich themselves and stuff. Never wanted to be that. So I always wanted to make sure that whatever I say is grounded in reality.
mm,
I don't like that's what my writing is about, because I kind of always tell the stories of what I've been doing
mm,
and what I've seen work for
mm,
others, trying to avoid like evangelizing things that I have no idea about.
mm,
Which is why the first book that I wrote, Zero to Sold, was about my FeedbackPanda journey,
mm.
the journey that we actually went through in the building and selling the
Right.
business. The second book that I wrote was Embedded Entrepreneur, about embedded entrepreneurship, going into a community and building a business from within,
Mm,
which is what I did with Permanent Link and the book, The Embedded Entrepreneur itself.
mm,
And my next one that I'm currently writing is about building in public,
mm,
which is something that I've been doing for the last 2 years.
mm,
So I'm always trying to like really confine myself to the stuff that I have any real experience with, because I have this fear that if I don't, I'll just end up tweeting like super short quotables that have no meaning whatsoever and have lots of people just like retweeting them because they think I'm the greatest person that ever lived.
right.
I just never want to get anywhere near this.
Mm,
Hence, yeah, my that's funny enough. That's kind of an imposter syndrome thing that I'm dealing with
mm,
all the time.
mm.
Kind of keeps me restrained to talking about the things that I have an idea about. But sorry for digressing here. As you can tell, I go on tangents quite easily.
Yeah.
So that's it's going to be a fun conversation. So that's my intro. I do all kinds of things, but I try to stick to what I know.
Got it. Yeah, no, it's fascinating to for anybody who's discovering Arvid for the first time on this podcast, or if you already know him. I think it's worth going back and seeing. His own blogs, and he has a solo podcast on his website, and it's worth seeing. As he's doing the thought process, like you said, because. Um, I think that requires a lot of discipline and requires a lot of micro detailing that is very hard for a lot of people to do, because usually
Mm,
the in my understanding, that like usually the two kinds of people, or I don't like these definitions, but okay, for the sake of the illustration, I'll just say that what I come across is people who like to have a broad brush kind of an approach, where they only focus on
mhm,
macro movements, or generally just like the big stuff. And then there are people who are able to sort of piece by piece put together what they've done specifically,
mm,
which is what I really like about, and I admire that about people who are on Twitter, especially. There's a certain number of people who can do that really well, where they're able to break down
mhm,
in a lot of detail. So very, very interesting to see, and you, I think, have become known for that quite a bit in circles. And then of course Twitter has this habit of then making you a little bit of micro legend, if you call it, within the community.
mhm.
So
Yeah, that's
as
right.
much as everybody loves to stay away from the guru bit, but then I think people who aren't as successful, or are still early on in the journey, like to see further along, and find people. And I think you've done
Yeah.
a good job of not misdirecting them, or trying to let's say, in the name of advice, not trying to sell them something,
Mhm.
which is a common
Yeah.
thing that people do, is they'll say something very clever and or philosophical, and then immediately plug whatever they have as to sell. Okay, buy my course,
Mm.
which I find very fascinating.
Well, I do the same.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
got to
yeah.
be honest. I got to be honest. I wrote books to help, but they are also physical
Oh yeah,
objects
sure,
that I sell, right? It's also an income source. And I want to be absolutely clear that this is, for me at least, perfectly legitimate
sure.
to build something as a solution to somebody's problem and sell it.
Yes.
But the like misdirection, I think that's the point,
Yep.
right? If I I've been recently, because there's Black Friday is coming up, and
Mm.
I'm just doing my own marketing and sales as well, right? Because I'm a self published author.
Yep.
I gotta show up. Nobody else is gonna talk about my stuff. So I've been like posting things from my book and putting a link to my book, like a CTA, under each tweet, and I think that's a fair approach of
Of
like
course.
exchanging information for
Yes.
attention. And I think most people have this kind of romantic notion of no self promotion in
Mm.
communities at
Mm.
all.
Mm.
But then the question is like, what is the incentive for anybody to even participate in the community?
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
It's a very complicated and quite delicate subject for me, because I don't want to overdo it, but I also don't want to underdo it.
Sure.
It's complicated. Let's just say that. But What I want to be, and that's kind of what from the perspective from which I operate. I don't want to be the guru, like I said. I want to be like a peer that is a couple steps ahead
Mm,
to all these
mm,
founders, because I was such a founder just a couple years ago,
mm,
and I was looking up to people like Rob Walling
mm,
and Tyler Tringus,
mm,
like, and just yeah, Justin Jackson, like all these guys and girls
mm,
in the community that have accomplished something before I've ever wrote my first line of SaaS code, right? All these people that have been there for decades at this point. Don't want to kind of out them in terms of age, but they're sometimes a little bit older than I am, and just people who I look up to because of the not just the success that they had. I think that is quite a shallow perspective, but of the impact on the community
mm,
that they still had, even though they didn't have to,
mm,
right?
mm.
Like these are people that built amazing businesses and still took the time to educate
Right.
and to share
Mm.
and to empower the people to lift them up. That is what I'm trying to do. I want to be that person for somebody else, like those people were for me.
Yes.
And obviously everybody's trying to make money in this world and trying to sustain whatever kind of income levels they think they need, so that's part of it. But my perspective is I want to be
Mm,
a peer with something to sell,
mm,
but still a peer.
mm. I think to your point there, and I I like to clarify in a very specific way. I think there's a very clear difference between people who sell an opportunity to people who are vulnerable versus people who
Yes.
sell what they have to sell. Okay, there's a big
Yes.
difference. So if
Yeah.
I come up to the world
Yeah.
and say, hey, I've made this WordPress theme and buy my WordPress theme, then there's absolutely no problem in that, right? I think where it becomes very, let's say, unethical from my perspective, how I see it is, and how it's done is, it's like a click, like a bait and switch. It is like, okay, here's
Yeah.
viral content, okay, which I've carefully figured out how this platform works,
Hmm.
and then here you go. This is no skills required, no money required, no experience required. You don't even have to be a human being. Here you go, buy my course, okay? And which is what I
Yeah.
feel is disingenuous overall,
Yeah.
from what we're talking about. What you're doing is not even in that that conversation.
Mhm.
What you're
Yeah.
It's very specific to people who try to get people on who are, let's say, not at all let's say, built for that, or don't even have the desire, the initial desire to be that person, or even
Yeah.
get into that business, but somebody sells it to them as like this magical thing. Hey, start your own agency, or start this and start that, and get. And in fact, I think you mentioned so many times in different places where you've had your own view on having whether whether you should have a SaaS business, not have a SaaS business. I think
Mhm.
was that even Nathan from ConvertKit, he's laid
Mhm.
out that as well. Okay, what kind of different businesses can you do and all of that. But I think
Yeah.
it's very clear that if the original desire from that person is not there, then it's very let's say, slightly falsely, or let's say misdirected, that hey, this
Yeah.
is this holy grail business that you can set up right away. Become a ghostwriter,
Yeah.
and then they'll sell you the ghostwriting sort of course, which is what I feel is which is what I was
Yeah.
specifically pointing to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of predatory, right? It's just kind of like preying on people who you think you can make a quick buck off, and then have them figure out
Yep.
how to use that information. Yeah, I think you're right that there's a difference, and I'm trying to stay very clear
Mm.
of the gray zone in between those two, because it's easy with it's like with the whole Web3 and NFT world.
Mm.
There is so much weird stuff going on that all the legitimate projects have this taint of weirdness,
Yes.
right?
Mm.
Obviously there is art in the space. There are people building tokenized like ticket systems, or even communities who just govern
Mm.
themselves, like the ENS thing with the where there was an airdrop just a couple weird weeks ago with the domain systems in the other
Oh
space.
yeah.
That was very interesting, and that is an actual to me an actual experiment in governance,
Mm.
and that is wonderful to watch. And that is one side of it. And then there's the overwhelming side of Ponzi scheme like
Yeah. Yep.
communities with the rug pulls and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting to watch, but not interesting to be a part of.
Correct.
So now I want to be part of the Web3 community because I just feel it's incredibly empowering to creators,
Mm.
but I don't want to associate myself with the abusive and predatory practices of
Mm.
some
Mm.
very loud and very flashy projects on the other side.
Right.
it's the same for business advice, right?
Mm,
That you have people who try to just monetize gullibility,
mm,
and then there's people who try to genuinely help and still make a living. Like all things in life, there's a continuum, and once you know where not to go, you know where you can kind of where you should stay. But it's an interesting point. I think that this conversation is just showing me how incredibly hard it
mm,
is to build trust
mm,
on the internet.
mm,
You know,
mm,
like the NFT thing, for example, like you build trust in a community and then you just walk away with all the money and
mm,
then you burn the trust of those
mm.
people and they might never have trust in any community like this again.
Right.
You know, like that is very destructive behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
And it may benefit you in the short term, but it does not benefit the community or the wider technology adoption either. The
Mm,
same goes for advice
mm,
or peddling your course or something. There are a couple names that are both in the entrepreneurial advice and the NFT community who are making a lot of money from this,
mm,
who I don't really enjoy anymore for that particular reason. You
mm,
know,
mm.
which is unfortunate because particularly yeah, I don't want to single out anybody
Sure.
here, and I'm not going to name any
Yeah, yeah.
names. You know, the bigger guys that have a
Mm,
huge following and just monetize that quite quickly,
mm,
and who also have built a career on making money online and teaching people how to do it.
mm,
I get it.
mm.
They make money and thereby show that they're good at making money.
Correct.
Then they sell you the product that teaches you supposedly how to make more money,
Mm.
but it feels yeah, it always has this kind of smell, this
Yep.
kind of, this is not for the community, this is enriching myself first and then it trickles down, hopefully maybe into other people's lives. Kind of don't like that, but don't want to go around blaming people here. Really, it's and
Sure.
everybody has different
Yeah, yeah,
audiences,
yeah.
right? You have audiences of people who are just starting out and they want to see the big guys with the Lamborghinis and that stuff. They need that as a motivation to
Mm,
even get going.
mm,
Then at the later point, they figure out, okay, maybe there's too much flashy stuff over here.
mm,
Let's find like the not the real entrepreneurs, because we are all entrepreneurs,
mm,
but the more, you know, community minded, the more like sustainability minded entrepreneurs that are maybe more honest in certain ways or more transparent. I think there's a space and a place for everyone,
mm,
really.
mm,
And I'm not trying to serve everybody either, just those people that
mm.
like what I'm doing and how I do it.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's good to have perspective. It's an ongoing conversation, I think, and everybody has different ways to look at it. Some people money minded, some people, and again,
Yeah.
nothing wrong or right about that. And some people
Yeah,
are,
exactly. It's
is
all legitimate.
absolutely. I think it's just, but I always like to be opinionated on things because I don't like to be too diplomatic as well. Because I feel that
Okay.
then we enter into this very corporate area of or these how
Yeah.
these big guys do it, and I'm like, you know what, I'm in any room you put me in, I'll have an opinion, and I will not be shy in sort of putting that across. So if it's something that, like you said, if you enjoy something, then absolutely. If you don't, of course there are ways to do it, and I think you talk about it quite a bit in how to actually have
Mm.
empowering replies to a tweet,
Yeah.
which is, I think, I've seen I think a tweet of yours which mentions that. I struggle with it personally.
Mhm.
I have to write my reply and then save it into drafts a few times to not really annoy a bunch of people. But yeah, like, do you want to talk about that a little bit in terms of how do you
Mhm.
think? I don't want to be too mushy, but but maybe how, like you said, maybe be kind over the internet, or expressing
Mhm.
your opinion without really it sounding like it is some sort of a criticism or very, let's say,
Yeah.
very aggressive kind of, let's say, language or something. How important do you
Yeah.
think that's been in your own communication and in general how you approach social media?
Okay. Well, first off, I believe that like when I am on social media, I'm not there to be right,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm there to build relationships with other people. And often that has like a little part of that is compromise, right? In a way, like I cannot always be right and also have other people feel like they're welcome and appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
So the diplomatic situation often comes into play, but it's much easier to build a relationship with a person when you are goal aligned, right? Like in anything, in business, in relationships, private, personal relationships, professional relationships. If you have the same goals, the same potential incentives out there as the person you're working with, then moving towards it is a parallel move. It's not a
Mm,
move that kind of intersects, or where people there's any friction. It's really both people are moving towards the same goal.
mm,
And that's the image that just came to my mind when you were talking about empowering replies. Because if somebody tweets something that you disagree with,
mm,
all you really need to do is figure out what is their goal.
right.
Why are they talking about this? What are they trying to accomplish with this?
Mm,
And then you look at that goal, and you craft your reply towards that, instead of as a commentary or
mm,
a differing opinion on their reply.
mm,
I know that that's a kind of a vague description of how to reply, but it's like if somebody wants to build a good pricing system, and they say, I think it's impossible to build more than 3 tiers because there's so many people out there that get like, I don't know, overwhelmed by choice. And then your opinion is, well, I'm running a business and I have 5 pricing tiers and it works just fine.
mm,
Instead of saying, no, you're wrong,
mm,
I have 5 and it's great. You say, I had a similar problem in the beginning, and then I experimented with 3, I experimented with 4, I saw no drop off, and then 5, and now I'm still at a great place.
mm,
And people have been writing about this. They responded to me about that, and I've done these experiments, and that you can guide people towards your opinion by just having goal alignment,
mm,
which is what empowerment really is about, because that's the kind of tide lifting all boats scenario
mm,
in my mind,
mm,
right?
mm,
I retweet a lot. I have a lot of people. I follow like 11,000 people on Twitter at
mm.
this point, and there's a lot of stuff happening in my feed. And whenever I see something that I feel would be helpful for people to have more eyes on, I
Mm,
click the little retweet
mm,
button, because it really, first off, it's very little effort on my end, gotta be honest.
mm,
Like liking on Twitter
mm.
and retweeting on Twitter is literally just 2 clicks,
Right.
and it doesn't cost me much other than the reputation, a little tiny micro fragment of reputation that goes with that every
Mm,
single
mm,
time. But since I spread it out over so many people, there really isn't that much risk either. I'm doing like reputation risk minimization strategies by like diversifying, I guess. But that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to help
mm,
as many people at scale as possible, like, get more eyes on their stuff,
mm,
be it a celebration of like something that they accomplished,
mm.
or finding an answer to a question that they have, or just like anything that's happening in somebody else's life is worth being seen in the world. That's, as a built in public person, that's kind of how I feel about anybody's journey,
Right.
right? Somebody built something new and it works, great. Let's share this with people that can learn something good from that. Somebody built something new and it doesn't work, wonderful. Now we have a opportunity to communicate with each other about why it didn't work.
So, Arvid, I think the takes that you have on, uh, I think we have a friend. You're much more like you know her much more than I do, of course. But Michelle, I think, talks about deploying empathy. She's got the book,
Yeah,
and then that's I think a little bit of what Guy Vaynerchuk also talks about. But I think it's been challenging for people. I think to because of the cross pollination of culture. I think in general,
mm,
doing it at scale is not only some tactic, but it
mhm,
requires a little bit of a complete understanding, because you
yeah,
have to really really look at things from the perspective of somebody who's sitting in another part of the world, and maybe
yeah,
their situation is so different from yours, that maybe their
yeah,
background is so different and their politics is so different. And I think that becomes hard for people who usually come from backgrounds where they're challenged all the time on their opinion or don't have a voice. And I do feel that on
yeah,
the internet it sort of amplifies that a lot. Whereas in private, they'll be really fine, but they just feel attacked because they maybe don't agree with it,
yeah.
from the beginning. So absolutely, like what you said, makes a lot of sense in terms of that perspective shift. But let's talk about the books. You've got Zero to Soul, which
Hmm.
of course I think was your um,
Yes.
first book, and then you sort of wrote that, keeping FeedbackPanda in mind. And that is, do you want to like highlight that? Because I think a lot of people, sometimes people buy, I know you know the stats, but a lot of people have bought the book, but I don't know how many of them complete the book. And then there are a lot of other people who have heard of the book, or generally.
Hmm.
So what is it about? Because of course the title is, you've picked the right hook, in
Hmm.
that sense. But it's like, what is it about? And like, what, and then can you
Yeah.
just like immediately go over the next two books that are there, because I think
Sure.
a lot of people, it becomes very vague. I think once it gets to three books, it's like one book is easy to explain, but then
Yeah.
so if you're a founder, marketer, let's say SaaS founder, bootstrapper, etc., which one is the one that you would want somebody to read if you were gifting them something or whatever? Which one should they read first, and second and third?
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny because both the first book was something that I wrote where I tried to put everything I knew into
Mm,
one book. It's like I wanted to write a book that had I read that book 5 years prior, I
mm,
would have not made all these little mistakes, or not would have made them faster and better along the way. That's kind of the
mm,
idea, which is why it's from zero to sold, because it really goes from like the idea phase, like where you come up with, oh, I want to build a business, that very initial oh, I want to do something, what can I do, to
mm,
the point where you're sitting like knee deep in due diligence, selling a business to somebody who wants to acquire you every single step
mm,
along the way. That's kind of what I wanted to write about. And the thing is, the book wasn't meant to be a book to begin with. Like
mm,
the book was written on my blog
mm,
randomly, all kinds of topics. When I started building this blog after I had sold the business, just a couple months after, I needed something to do and I started writing. I
mm,
was writing about all different kinds of topics. I was writing about
mm,
the idea in the beginning and how to sell your business and how to do pricing and how to build your MVP and like
mm,
all over the place. Like
mm,
I had a journey of many years, and I picked the month 2, month 26. Like I guess that's like 2.5 years, but month 20 and
oh
that
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of stuff. I just went all over the place with my blog posts.
Mm,
Every week I wrote about something new. And then at
mm,
some point, I put it into a shape where I could kind of order these things in a certain way. And I figured
mm,
out, okay, this actually has some sort of from the start to beginning vibe. I
mm,
filled in the pieces that were missing. And then it turned into at this point, I think 550-page book. It's quite
mm,
substantial.
mm,
And that's also what turns this from a one time read
mm,
into a guidebook along the journey. I've
mm,
found a lot of founders, they've started with the first couple chapters, which are about ideation, finding your audience, finding their problem, building your solution,
mm,
and the product to then sell, and figuring out the initial pricing and like the first survival stage kind of stuff. So that from reading that, then they built their actual MVP, and then
mm,
they continued reading into, okay, so now how do you do customer service right? How do you
mm,
just build a technical product that is easy to maintain and also easy to sell? Because that's
mm,
the idea in the book the whole time. The main thread is build a sellable business,
mm,
right? Because a good business is sellable, and a sellable business has to be good. So by
mm,
building a sellable business, you'll also have a good business. That's kind of the idea. So all the chapters in the book, they get more and more detailed the further you get towards the end, because things just get more complicated while you're
mm,
building a business. And then it culminates in, what do you do to prepare your business to be acquired? Check for red flags with your acquirer, and how to prepare due diligence. Like these specifics, they are in the final chapters. While in the middle, you find things like, yeah, how to build a product that sticks, or building referral systems. Everything I learned, what I'm saying, like this is why that's
mm,
550 pages. Everything I knew went into this initial book that I wrote. And then I released a book. I self
mm,
published this and had a lot of feedback from people. They were telling me, I've been reading your book. It was amazing. Could you please talk more about this particular part?
mm,
And the thing that people talked about most, wanted me to talk about more, the most, was the initial part, finding the right people to serve, finding your audience, building an audience. That was what most people struggled with immediately. They had an idea, or they knew how to build an MVP because they were technical enough. So that stuff wasn't really the problem. But who do I serve? Like,
mm,
who do I want to build a solution to their problems for, was
mm,
one of the major issues.
mm,
So that is why I took this particular part of Zero to Sold and just zoomed in. That was where the embedded entrepreneur came in, because that is really just looking at, how do I find the people to serve and empower,
mm,
and what are the problems, and how can I find them?
mm,
Anything else is not part of that book. That is really just zooming into this particular, exactly like initial big bang moment, where you need to figure out, who am I going to serve for the next 10 years,
mm,
and how am I going to do it? What
mm,
do they need help with? So that's what the second book is about. It's just zooming into this particular part. And funny enough, there's a little chapter on building in public in the embedded entrepreneur.
mm,
And people have been talking more and more about building in public. So now I'm going to zoom into that part of my zoom in already, and
mm,
go much deeper into, how do you share your progress in public? How do you talk about your problems, your failures, your mistakes in public? How
mm,
can you leverage this kind of public attention to build a business, both in the sense of how can you find customers and how can you find other entrepreneurs and founders that support you along the way. Like that is what building in public is all about, and that's what I want to dive in even more. So it's getting more and more practical in the very detailed way. And
Mm,
I don't know what my fourth book is going to be. Either I'm going to zoom in again, or I'm going to zoom out and zoom into something else. But that's how I write. Again,
mm,
the things that I do, right? I want to write about the things that I actually have experience with. So I zoom into the things that I've already done. And yeah, the embedded entrepreneur is really a guide to finding the people you want to serve. It starts with trying to take this product first approach that we have in the community so often, and you hinted at that earlier, right?
mm,
Where people have an idea, they build it, and then they hope somebody buys it.
mm,
Might work if you're lucky, and it does work for some people. But just look at Product Hunt and see like all the products on top that get a lot of upvotes. Great,
mm.
somebody built something that people need, and then you scroll down and you have hundreds of people launching every day, and nobody cares.
Right.
Not because it's a bad product, but just
Mm,
because there's no audience for it. Right.
mm,
That's why I
mm,
want to flip this script that people have in their minds from build the thing first and then get people to buy it to embed yourself in their communities,
mm,
listen to them,
mm,
listen and observe what people are talking about, what problems they have, figure out which problem is interesting for you to solve, find a way to solve it for people that fits into their world, and
mm,
then solve it with and for them. That's what the embedded entrepreneurship approach is. And
mm,
the book is about each of these steps. Who do I want to serve? Where are they? How do I get in there? How do I listen? How do I take notes? And then how do I find the problem that I want to serve? And then how do I build an audience while doing this? How do I write good threads on Twitter? How do I tweet? How do I empower people? How do I engage with people? How do I write good content? All of this is in my second book. Because again, zooming into this initial stage that you need to get right to have an easier time building your business down the road. So yeah,
right.
there you go.
And then
That's my writing.
and then you got the build in public bit as well, which is, I think, like you said, so you've got the first one, zero to soul. Almost like a guidebook, like you said, a lot of founders are using it.
Yes.
The embedded
Yeah.
entrepreneur is something that became a specific problem that a lot of
Mhm.
people try to answer. I think a lot of people have tried to, answer that over the years as well. But
Mhm.
it's just that I think it does not get a lot of attention as a more open thing, because there's so many different approaches
Yeah.
to really trying to find out, because there's some businesses, I think, where if you don't have the product and don't give it in the hands of people, then there's no, that feedback loop doesn't start. But there are certain other
Yeah.
businesses where you can gather feedback, early on without even
Right.
building something. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because that it reminds me of the conversation we had earlier about like there is no one size fits all
Mm,
approach to anything, right?
mm,
It's the same for entrepreneurship. The embedded entrepreneurship approach is great for some things, and
mm,
it's very useless for others. Right? If
right.
you want to build like a stealth product with like some specific intellectual property that you really need to protect because you're in an extremely competitive market and people quickly try to grab this and build this into their own systems, well, then this is not the approach for you. Then you need to build like a VC funded, heavily protected, yeah, business that has very, very different
Mm,
requirements, right? So it's that there is no perfect approach. It's just if you build a bootstrap business, if you build a self funded business, and you want it to be as potentially successful as possible because it's your money,
mm,
then listening to people and building what they need might
mm,
be the better approach than hoping that what you build is good for somebody somewhere at some point, right? That's really
mm,
what it is all about. So if you
mm,
have a lot of money that comes in from a funding source and you want to change the world of transportation like Uber did or something,
mm,
then you have to do this moonshot kind of I think I know better approach and
mm,
just push it into the market and hope that people adopt it. But if you want to build an iteration on a podcast hosting platform, like the people like Justin Jackson and John Buda did
mm,
at Transistor FM,
mm,
they were very open. They had a very transparent business. Transistor was an open business. They shared their revenue, they shared their MRR, that all the even the cohorts, all that kind of stuff. They had a lot of insight. They shared what they were building, how they were building it on their podcast too. Right,
mm,
bootstrapping SaaS. That was a built in public moment for a business that was just different enough to be different
mm,
from what existed in the field,
mm,
to be noticeably different, but it was not a completely new way of doing podcast hosting. It
mm,
was still hosting files, it was still like RSS feeds and all that stuff. It's not technologically different, it's just a slightly different approach. And by building in public, they found the right people that resonated with that.
Mm.
And that was a great idea, right? They found me, for example. I host my
Mm.
podcast there and
Mm.
I talk about it. I'm even wearing the swag. I have a hat, like Justin sent me a transistor hat and everything. And I wear that when I go to the store because I want to represent my podcast hosting because I'm relating to them, right? I
Mm.
know who Justin is. Justin talks to me.
Mm.
Justin talks to a lot of people. Obviously, he has a lot
Mm.
of people that he's engaging with, but I like him. I want him to succeed. And that's why building in public is so powerful. And that's why it's such a good idea for solopreneurs because they are the brand. And like Transistor is it's a brand by itself, but to me, it will always be Justin Jackson.
Mm.
Like that is the face of the business. And when I think about where am I going to host my podcast, it's not I'm going to go to the Transistor platform. It's I'm going to go with Justin's thing.
Mm.
And that is such a powerful connection that I've never met Justin in real life. I mean, I moved to Canada, so we are now in the same country, and we probably will meet up one day at a conference or whatever. But I feel connected to the guy, and I would assume that he has some connection with me as well. And that will always keep me talking about it. You could probably sense that I'm super enjoying this because it's just such a great example of how we built a relationship on this platform on Twitter with a business in between that
Mm.
actually has a transactional thing. Like I pay them money every month. I'm a
Mm.
regular customer, right? There's
Mm.
there's no affiliation or anything there. Just a customer that likes the product. And if you can do this at scale by being public and transparent,
Mm.
and by being part of your community and solving the problems within the community that people bring to you, which
Mm.
is the embedded way,
Right.
why wouldn't you? Right? Why wouldn't you
Mm.
want to do that?
Mm. I think you bring up a great point. I think at the end you said, okay, if you're solving the problem while you're within the community, the community would of course like yeah, why wouldn't they
Mhm.
come to you? And I think you see this a lot in let's say different circles, where you see people who are maybe uh, who do this thing where the building in public is actually not building in public in the sense of showcasing what they're doing in public. It's almost like as
Mhm.
if they're solving the problem in public, right?
Yeah.
There's actually a more, I would say, a more appropriate way to sort of actually look at it, because then
Yeah.
you do see a lot of people who get to a point, and this is I think something where Banner Bear and I think John or that Young Fook was talking about it. Okay,
Yep.
now that I've hit, like, he's solving a problem mainly for enterprise guys now, and he's hit a
Mhm.
place where probably doing 20-25,000 MRR or something. And now the point is,
Yep.
like, the significance of doing what he was doing originally is not really there anymore. And a lot of these guys I think jumped into that conversation and said, hey,
Yep.
sharing MRR is not really helping in any way,
Yep.
where it was helping earlier. So I think it's also about, like, okay, solving the problem, but okay, you're doing that solving of the problem in public, not necessarily showcasing what you're doing in public, which is I think
Yeah.
a slightly different approach.
It's funny that you say that because that's the exact article that I'm writing about right now. Like I'm having this here. That the title of this thing is the problem with sharing revenue numbers in building in public,
uh,
and this whole thread was the reason why I'm writing about this because
mm,
at some point you just have diminishing returns, and it's
mm,
not the first time that this happened. Like John Youngfolk's experience is the exact same that Justin Jackson had. Like they were talking about this with Transistor too. At some point they stopped being transparent because it was actually hurting them
mm,
because there was no more value in getting these numbers out, getting people encouraged about following the journey
mm.
because it was over encouraging and it was so encouraging that other people tried to compete with them at some point,
Yep. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is when this becomes oversharing. It's funny because
Mm,
it's always at this particular stage when it's 20-25,000, which for
mm,
most people is this is a solid solid this is a stellar income
mm,
to have in dollars on the internet
mm,
wherever you live. Like if you live in
mm,
the States, it's pretty good. But if you live in a place where the purchasing power parity is
mm.
kind of skewed, that is like
Oh
that
yeah,
is
it's good
wealth,
money.
right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
That builds wealth super quickly from
yes.
something that is quite scalable. So it
Mm,
invites a lot of copycats, a lot of people trying to compete with you, and the more information you provide to them,
Mm,
well, the more that there's a risk that people use this information against you. I was talking about this with the cohorts, right? Like
mm,
when I think I remember it that way. I need to check that, which is why I'm writing the article. I'm not done yet, but I think John was talking about they had a lot of insight into their bare metrics or their Stripe data that they shared, and you could even see like which cohort cancels when. Like you could see
mm,
really by age groups, even by demographics, I think. So you could see that there was an opportunity where some people canceled more, were more likely to cancel than others, and some smart people figured out why that was, and then they built something to serve that need,
mm,
which is cutting into their customer base, right? So they stopped showing that information. They just stopped showing it altogether because yeah, that was hurtful. In the beginning, that was super helpful because it was encouraging other founders to go on their own journeys, maybe become a customer at some point because they needed it for their own stuff. But yeah, the marketing value of it definitely diminished, and the potential risk increased. Also, honestly, if you're running a business with a $20,000 MRR and you're just a team of one or two,
mm,
which is where we were after a year and a half maybe of Feedback Panda, you have other things on your mind than consistently sharing everything that goes on. There's a
mm.
lot going on in a business with a couple thousand customers,
Oh yeah.
and
Mm,
building in public becomes less of a priority because you find that in this kind of stability stage, you're looking for these processes that are self-amplifying, right? These things
mm,
that are catalysts that you don't need to do much anymore, but the process itself amplifies the growth of your business. And building in public is a kind of thing that doesn't scale. It's like a
mm,
Paul Graham essay style thing that doesn't scale because you have to manually do it. You
mm,
have to create content about what you're doing that is informative and instructive and just inspiring to other people. But that is work. It can't be automated. You cannot automate building in public because that would
mm,
just be sharing random MRR fragments in public, and that's not interesting to anybody.
mm.
So that's stuff that you can't do automatically, and you also can't really outsource it because that is a founder thing. You need
Right.
to do it as a founder. You can't have
Mhm,
a writer do this like a contractor. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how you feel and how you're afraid of stuff. They will never be able to communicate
mm,
that. So it's just an attention thing as well. So you,
mm,
you see this dropping off at some point, and I think that's actually good. Like I
mm,
have this in my outline of the book that I want to write in building in public. There's a limitation chapter where I'm
mhm,
going to talk about what are the limits of this. And I think you have this kind of graduation where you
mm,
graduate from building in public at all times into being more selective. And I
mm,
think it's fine.
mm,
That turns building in public into a phase,
mm,
not a phase, not a thing that will be over and you hope it's over soon, but it's a thing that works better in different stages of your business,
mm,
and that's what it's for.
mm,
And there's
mm,
there's a lot of there's an interesting kind of purity talk in the community about building in public. I don't
mm,
know if you noticed that, but I was talking about just last week. I was saying there are certain things you shouldn't talk about in public,
mm,
private stuff, personal stuff, things that doesn't belong there, that is not aligned with what you want to build or what your overall strategy is. And I posted that on Twitter, and I got a lot of backlash on that. People were
ah,
saying you should share everything.
mm,
Building public is about transparency and it's about openness and honesty. And like, yes, but you can't force people to
mm.
share everything. That
Yep.
is not what this is about, right?
Right.
Building in public is supposed to be instructive, educational, and helpful and supportive,
Mm,
but we are all beings that have the need for privacy. And
mm,
it's funny to do that on a platform like Twitter and a social
mm,
medium where privacy is bombarded by
mm,
like by all kinds of things, right? Where
mm,
people say once you build in public, you should share everything. Not
mm,
a fan of that. And
mm,
that's my opinionated stuff. That's where
mm,
I say, okay, you can take this too far.
mm,
Obviously, there's business consequences. I just talked about them, right? People copying and cloning your business in a way that you can't just ignore. You can
mm,
ignore many copycats along the way because they
mm,
just clone the business. They don't clone the idea, but
mm,
um, or they don't clone your understanding of the business. It's
mm,
probably better to say that like that. But at some point, all the information you might give away is actually super instructive, and they might just infringe on whatever you're doing. So
mm,
I'm just coming to terms with the fact that the community has a very black and white perspective on this.
mm,
and I'm trying to find a way to encourage people to do it and still have some kind of private island in this big ocean of building in public, because you
yep,
need privacy, you need to have your own personal space.
mm,
And just think about it, you have a you have burnout,
mm,
you are in the middle of building a business and something comes your way that's just kind of super problematic. Of course you can talk about it, maybe it's helpful to talk about it, it's cathartic, or maybe somebody out there can help you. But I would never want to write a book that tells people to share whatever happens to them
mm,
and makes them feel bad about not sharing it.
mm,
Because if you feel you shouldn't share this, if you feel this is going to damage your mental health, you are
mm,
not capable of doing this in public, then don't.
mm,
You and your mental health and your physical health and your motivation, that's core of your business.
mm,
Building a public is but one more tool
mm.
to build your business with.
Yep.
It's not it's not all and everything.
Mm,
I'm trying to kind of find a balance for
mm.
all of this.
So
And
I
it's
think I,
interesting to see.
sorry, go for
Yeah,
it.
go on. No, I was just trying to say that the community being that almost platonic in their sense of what it should be. They have this ideal,
Mm,
and if you don't reach that ideal, you're doing it wrong, which is
mm.
against all entrepreneurial perspective, because you never get anything right when you're an entrepreneur. You're
Yep.
just like trying to figure
Mm,
stuff out. It's all a big experiment, and I
mm.
think building a public should be one as well.
Hmm. I think, but I'd like to add 2 points to that. So one is, I think there's this misconception around what a community is, and I think there's this definition of a community being a place. Okay, it's like
Yeah.
we are hardwired, I think, in some ways to think of community as a place because we all come from an offline setup, and but in the online world, it's not a place; it's a moment. It's a moment in time, and
Mhm.
it's a moment in time with a certain background in each person's life that's happening in there, and each one of them is there for
Mhm.
an agenda. Each one of them has their own sort of thing, and so for example, something that you share today in this week on a 5 p.m. timeline could be
Mhm.
getting a very different reaction to, let's say, if you post it on, some other day of the week at maybe 4:30 p.m. So I
Yeah.
think there's this, like you said, there's this ideal definition of what a community is, which I think is rooted in thinking of community as a place, but it actually is a moment in time with
Mhm.
lots of factors and lots of movements. The only thing I think that people forget is that the variables on an online system are so many, right? That the change is so rapid that people are not able to handle that. It's like, uh, because opinions change quickly, views change quickly. In an offline world, right? If you're part of a community, let's say, and you live in your area, your opinions don't change on a day-to-day basis as quickly as what it does on the internet. So it's almost like you're in a community in a time frame, in a momentary
Yeah.
time frame, that okay, from, like, for example, you guys, so you've got, so Arvid, John Young Fook, and then you just think of all these names. That's it's almost like a momentary thing. It's like from, like, if you calculate from, okay, January to of 2020 up till this particular time, these guys are very active on Twitter, so they got to know each
Mhm.
other,
Yeah.
and it was that moment in time, right,
Yeah.
that things were happening in the world and things were happening. But then that community could now suddenly change because now there are new players and new things and new motivations, and the algorithm changes, and maybe you don't become as active, maybe another voice comes into the system. So I
Yeah.
just feel that people don't take it as, they don't respect the fact that it is so dynamic,
Yeah.
and people think that it's very static, and it's fixed, and there's a place and all of that. And I think that's, I think, a big piece of this entire thing of why people get a lot of things wrong, because sometimes they try to
Yeah.
copy somebody who has done build in public 18 months back, right? But
Yeah.
like, because but the moment is different now, right? The market
Yeah.
changed, the
Yeah. That's
people
right.
changed, everybody changed. And I think measuring that on Twitter or online is very hard to do, is
Yeah.
because the algorithm controls so much of your feed that you might think that the world is not changing because you're seeing the same thing every day, but like, the world has changed. Twitter has changed suddenly. 100 new people came in, big voices come in, and before you even, like, get up in the morning and take a shower, and by the time you check your first tweet, the world had already changed. It's just that your feed did not change, right?
Yeah.
And I
That's
think
right.
in the online world, it's very hard to see that. in general. And that's one for sure thing. And I think the second bit that I want to specifically point out about this, overall, was I think people I think forget that there are trade-offs as well to all these things. So when you're doing like a build in public, or when you're doing, let's say, any of these things, there's always, even within productive things, like, hey, if you write a book, right, or if you go on a podcast, even productive things like that have a trade-off, have a, like, there's always a downside to, or there's always implications in some way or the other. And I think without knowing that, there is um, you know you have, I mean, to know that better, one has to go to the origins of why, let's say, this entire build in public thing even became popular. It became popular because businesses were not sharing numbers, they were not sharing metrics, they were not sharing their vulnerabilities. Leaders were acting, business owners and all of that, everyone was acting very, like you said, platonic, and very, let's say, I don't give a damn kind of thing. And I think a lot of consumerism now has been because of the media campaigns and all of that stuff, now rooted in this entire thing that, oh, you're supposed to be vulnerable, you're supposed to be, and you
Mhm.
see this now with Gary Vaynerchuk's book that's come out. And he's sort of, I always look at that and I say, okay, it's not that he's come up with the topic or the idea, it's just that the timing of it is so interesting, is because
Yeah.
that thing sells in the market. Vulnerability is something that people want to see more of. But I think as entrepreneurs, a lot of times people forget that, or at least bootstrappers, and so people forget or don't even understand that, hey, maybe, okay, it's something to be also looked at as, why is that happening, right? It's not about your journey of building in public. There's this entire wave underneath that people are, maybe been cheated before, maybe they're not really, necessarily been, business have not been transparent, and actually you're riding that wave, and it's got nothing to do, or maybe like 2% to do with your build in public
Yeah.
journey, but actually
Yeah.
got to do 98% with the fact that other people have not been transparent. So
Yeah.
I think to sort of address the build in public thing, one has to know the wave that's coming behind. But again, it's a moment in time. Maybe it's going to be relevant because the first initial guys benefited from it. But 3-4 years down the line, since if everybody's doing it, then it's that the question is, okay, it's just a normal thing. It's not like as novel as what you have remote okay, and you have all these Peter levels and all of these guys. So I
Mhm.
mean, it was normal when they started it, right? and
Yeah.
and that's also the part of this thing where once the novelty dries out and everybody's doing it, then it's a question of whether is there going to be a competitive advantage to
Yeah.
do that or not. So I do think that there are lots of things, like I would love to read your take on these things, in build in
Mhm.
public, that you're writing, because I think there are much more deeper things at play, beyond the
Yeah.
surface of Twitter. I think, and that Twitter is almost for me like a place where you actually come and witness what's on the surface, what actually has been
Definitely.
brewing
Yeah.
in the world and in people's minds and hearts, from a long time, is how I
Yeah.
look at it. Yeah.
I'm really grateful for these points because I think they lay the theoretical and um, yeah, bird's eye view foundation for why this is currently happening,
Hmm.
and why there is also so much confusion about it, right?
Hmm.
Because we treat it like a new thing,
Hmm.
but it's a consequence of an existing trend. I
Yes.
really appreciate that,
Hmm.
to just frame it
Hmm.
in the world right now, because vulnerability has just received this kind of reframing,
Hmm.
right? In a world where people are all of a sudden noticing and appreciating honesty
Hmm.
as a means of transacting,
Hmm.
because apparently all the transactions we had before were not quite honest.
Hmm.
Like marketing, you look at marketing in like 10, 20 years ago, a lot
Hmm.
of promises,
Hmm.
and it still is like that, and not often fulfilled.
Hmm.
And now people have a voice in
Hmm.
actually reviewing
Hmm.
or boycotting things, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden it turns into a more honest conversation, because the
Hmm.
people that could just promise whatever they wanted now are more accountable for the things that they do.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
obviously there is a wish for more vulnerability or more openness in
Hmm.
this, because
Hmm.
that facilitates more trust and more honesty. I think it's super connected. I'm really looking forward to
Oh yeah.
writing about this in more detail, because I think what you said really made me think about like the grander scheme, the grander
Hmm.
movements behind it,
Hmm.
right? and also why people then would want it differently. I'm just thinking about the
Yes.
people that talk to me about, no, building a public is supposed to be like this.
Mm.
It's really, it's really not. Like, we all do whatever we want to do, and in whatever way we want to do it. It's just how
Yep.
other people, how they would want it to be, how they
Yes.
want businesses to be. They want them to
Yep.
be like painfully honest, because
Mm.
if they're not, what are they hiding, right? Like, you
Mm.
have this
Yep.
sentiment in there. Super interesting. Thanks so much for sharing this moment in time. Generally awesome
Mm.
perspective on community, because
Mm.
I think also an evolutionary problem we have, because we
Mm.
cannot see community disjointed from the people in the community. Like, the
Mm.
concept of the abstract concept of community,
Mm.
I wouldn't even know how to describe it if I
Mm.
wouldn't envision like 20, 30
Yep.
people standing around, right?
Yep.
That's how my mind visualizes community. So to see this as a, yeah, as a kind of more loosely connected graph of people, very
Yes.
interesting, very helpful.
But
Hopefully something that we can do in a
I,
society that we can envision it like that.
I'll tell you where the trouble with that is, and I'll just quickly, add a very, very important point there. So, when we say community, if you do it offline, okay, if you and I, let's say, are connecting one on one,
Mhm.
whether it's on call or whether it's, let's say, in person, it's very different because you and I are connecting at a level of you and I know each other. It's not that
Mhm.
even then, human beings need an image of another person. Okay, so it's like
Yeah.
Arvid is an entrepreneur. Okay, he's from Germany, and then there's this image that's been created in my mind because there's no other way
Yeah.
for me to be able to identify who Arvid is. So first of all, there's this individual who is a male. This is how he looks. This is what his name is. If you go to the fundamental level of looking at that, so that's hard enough to do anyway because my mind is anyway constructing an image of you. I don't really know who
Yeah.
Arvid is in the real sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I always say that even I don't know who I am because it's like a bunch of a cluster of all these different things that are happening, right? So there's no one static definition of a person. But what becomes a bigger issue, right, which is why this entire community thing becomes a moment, is because and becomes more complicated than just being a moment, is because now you're
Mhm.
interacting with a public persona, okay, of another
Mhm.
person, which is you don't know whether it's made up or not. You don't know what the
Yeah.
motivations are of X, Y, and Z, when they're posting something. You don't even know that person exists or not. It could be an
Yeah.
alt account. It could be a
Yeah.
male who has put up a female's picture, but you in your head. But then now you get wrapped up in this entire thing because you have certain biases. You have
Mhm.
certain, so if you present that, let's say, profile picture to somebody, and it's got this, let's say, or profile picture along with profile bio, and the bio has like all
Mhm.
these very, let's say, aggressive sentences. Suddenly you create this
Mhm.
image in your head that, oh, this person is like that, right? You conclude
Yeah.
because you don't have that much time and bandwidth to process all that in your brain, so you start assuming things, and that's the
Yeah.
problem. Is there is no permanent sense of, there is no permanence when it comes to the online identity, and it's always
Yeah.
shifting. That's why build in public becomes very hard, or even becoming part of a community becomes hard, because there is nothing permanent about it. You're a bunch of identities that have been created for whatever reason, who are interacting with each other, but like at the back end of it, it's almost like you put a robo of yourself, and now the robo is interacting,
Yeah.
and now at the back of it,
Yeah.
completely different individuals. So it, I think,
Very good
messes
point.
with a lot of the, let's say, vulnerable younger people, or people who don't really understand as deeply as how we're talking about it, because they and I mean, listen, it messes with me as well. So even after understanding something like that, it will still trigger something, will trigger in me, a tweet will trigger something in me, and I'll want to reply back in a particular way. But I do feel that it's much deeper than the memes. Okay, it's much
Yeah.
deeper than just the surface level threads. It's much deeper than, and it's not rocket science. It's just that I think it's not been defined like how you're defining it within your book and all of that. And I
Mm.
feel these deeper things need to be looked at as well, beyond the platform itself, because you could take Instagram, or you could take, like,
Yeah.
LinkedIn, or you could take any kind of online behavior, which is, according to me, you can never have 100% a human being sitting in front. Like right now, there's always going to be a
Yeah.
filter. It's
Yeah.
not possible, and which is
Yeah.
what I think becomes very, very difficult to track, and this and that. So the layer that I was just wanted to like add was this synthetic identity piece of this.
Yeah.
If you want the right word, is synthetic identity that we've all created, and now we're trying to sort of, let's say, make sense of the world through these synthetic identities.
Yes.
which is again shaped so much by algorithms, shaped so much by, if you read Richard Thaler's book Nudge, he talks about behavioral design, and how it's all baked into this. So our laptop designs can shape that. It's something as simple as that. But I do feel it's a much deeper conversation overall,
Yeah,
than just the
it
symptoms of it. Yeah.
yes, I think you're absolutely right, and there's also always this shallowness, right,
Mm,
around how we communicate on these platforms. I completely agree, and I think there's that is probably the one thing that frightens me most for the generation that is currently being raised on this technology. That
mm,
there's a solid lack of awareness of that syntheticness that you describe, because
mm,
I feel it all the time in every interaction that I have on Twitter. In the moments where you feel like you're actually connecting to a human being, they are quite rare, because
mm,
everybody's projecting something,
mm,
for good
mm,
or for bad, right? Like,
mm,
some people try to be their better selves, some
mm,
people try to be their more successful selves, or
mm.
their more self-conscious selves. Like, nobody
Yep.
is just really who they are. Like,
Mm,
everybody's projecting, everybody's being
mm.
it's a performative act. Like,
Yes.
building a public itself is performative.
Mm,
And it's a performative act by a persona. I
mm,
think it's great that you pointed this difference. Like, being a person and being a persona are two very different things.
mm,
And a person, like, projecting a persona as a synthetic being into a platform that doesn't even have video or audio communication, like Twitter. The
yep.
layers, man, there's so
Yep.
many layers of abstraction and loss of meaning and
Mm,
specificity there. There's
mm.
just, like, we're even just scratching the surface of all
Oh
of
yeah.
this.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think
Mm,
building in public, or just being a nice person, a nice, kind, and empathetic person on Twitter,
mm,
over time will establish connections with other people who sense
mm.
that actually allow you to build relationships.
Sure.
That's kind of why I do it, right?
Mm,
I'm showing up every day so that
mm,
people who see me can figure out, okay, this is a person that does this, that I
mm,
can trust about these topics, and
mm,
that is a real person with a real interest in whatever kind of subject.
mm,
And if that's all I can do, I'll gladly do it.
mm.
Because there is a limit, again, to what you can be and what you can communicate.
Right.
But the more I do, the higher I push, the further I push the limit, right? The
Mm,
further I allow people to look into this and build their own opinion and their own relationship with me. And I think that may actually be a way of getting out of this problem of
mm,
syntheticness, or
mm,
inauthentic syntheticness,
mm,
is by keeping people accountable
mm,
to the relationships that they have already built and are willing to build, by just being themselves, or showing up so much that they can't help being themselves. I
mm.
hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can
Yeah.
only fake so much, and if you can fake this so well, well,
Mm.
then you're probably a sociopath anyway. So then that's your authentic self. But I mean, that's kind of, yeah. I think the building in public, and generally showing up in public, sharing in public, just
Mm,
presenting yourself in public, kind of forces you to show yourself,
mm.
and that might help. I hope. What's your point? What's your perspective on this? I would like to know. What do you think?
I think it's down to what you're trying to achieve, and I've been very vocal of that of late on Twitter as well. Is I think a lot of people don't know what they want. Okay, it's
Hmm.
that's like the starting question. And I think there's this trend of trying to get on trends that everybody gets on. Like, okay, and in fact, it's very funny because a lot of people actually, I don't remember which fellow bootstrapper or entrepreneur, I don't know who, is asking that question. Hey, what do you think? What are the other popular trends that are going around, like, built in public? And I
Oh,
found
that's
that
funny.
very fascinating because it just spoke to me to exactly confirm what I'm talking about. Is there's this tendency to jump on trends. So whether it's, let's say, Clubhouse that recently happened and everybody went to Clubhouse and suddenly came back. Now, if
Mm.
Elon Musk will tweet something, now you'll have a bunch of subtweets coming in there, and those are the usual suspects who are doing it. Then you'll have
Mm.
the Naval Ravikant saying something, now suddenly that's shaping everything, and then now all the young kids are now suddenly like, oh hey, this is what's there. So I think, for me, when it comes to build in public or any of these things, I think I don't want
You're
to be
gone
too
again.
naive to say, or I don't want to pretend in any way. I know business is always, I mean, I wouldn't be on Twitter if I'm not, if not for business. Think of it like that.
Mhm.
And I always ask that
Yeah.
question. I'm not interested in making new friends globally. Okay, fine. If we meet up and we catch up and we have a good time, great. Yes. But
Mhm.
I'm just saying I'm happy with, I'd always feel it becomes very chaotic with 30 people in the room. And
Yeah.
so for me it's just going to be, and I used to be a very different person earlier when I was younger, but over the years I've become very different. And I figured that, hey, this, like you said, it's a performative act. Okay, and the performative act requires an intention, and that intention is something that's not clear to everybody. And I think if you are specifically clear that, okay, I'm going to share in public because I want to share my metrics. Why? Because I want to build trust with people. Which people? These are the kinds of people I want to build trust with. And why is that important? Is because of X, Y,
Mhm.
and Z, right? And then that then sort of shapes how you proceed from that point on. I don't think people are as thoughtful about all this. They just go with the trend. And I think that the algorithms incentivize that. Like, so for example, if the algorithm did not incentivize subtweeting, for example, on large accounts, and let's say, in
Mhm.
fact, it probably punished you if you kept on. And I think they've started to do that a little bit now, that if they start
Mhm.
seeing that there is a particular account is constantly subtweeting all these big accounts, they now
Yeah.
have started to disincentivize. So I do feel that the algorithms are so powerful that
Mhm.
till they continue to reward that kind of behavior, you're going to see
Yeah.
people jumping on these trends. I do feel building in public is useful, but I do
Yeah.
also, on the parallel, know of successful people who are not even on Twitter. So
Yeah.
it's like it's one of those where I think it's very platform specific. If we started to do the same thing on LinkedIn, for example, it wouldn't help. If we did the same thing on, let's say, Instagram, it may or may not be as helpful. So I think there's a
Mhm.
I always tell people, do what works for you, and that you'll
Yeah.
only know when you sort of do what it is that you're supposed to, let's say, feel in that moment is the right thing to do. I think in general I'm not a big fan of all these general rules. It's just like I could probably be the 100th guy. So 99 people before me probably got it right, and I'll probably be the 100th guy who got it wrong, doing the exact same thing. So I'm just saying, like, but if you're asking for a specific opinion, why is it that you're doing that? If you don't have that clear, don't do it.
Okay.
You figure out a little more, dive in a little deeper, figure out why is it that it's happening. It's not that something is happening. Arvid is making build in public work for him, right? And so then
Mhm.
you got to figure out, okay, how are you going to make it work for you? And maybe
Yeah.
building in public is your angle. Maybe live tweeting a startup like Sam Thompson is your idea. Maybe
Yeah.
Twitch.tv live streaming startup, building a startup. Florin Pop does this live coding thing.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe that's your thing. So I think there is no outside external definition that you're
Yeah.
supposed to be
Yeah.
following. There is no
Absolutely.
method out there that's going to get you to so do all these big success. It's going to be okay. There are these 35, 40 things, or maybe forget about the 40 things. You just apply your common sense and your logic. And I think I talk about this a lot on the Twitter spaces, and I say, hey, all these concepts, right, they it's a trap, because what it does is you start living by those concepts,
Yeah.
right? And
That's right.
conceptual thinking is dangerous, because the Western world, right? I mean, I come from India, and it's of course prevalent even in this part of the world, but it's more so in the Western world, where you say, oh, Harvard publishes a study, and then now, because Harvard's published a study, hey, everybody should start going and doing that. So you saw that with jobs to be done framework, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, the guy's observing what is already happening, right? Now, if you could make this just as a framework, the problem is now, like we were discussing earlier, that, hey, maybe it doesn't work for 35 other situations. Maybe it's just
Yeah.
that situation. So I think there is a lot of ignorance about marketing and how marketing is done. If you read Category Pirates, if you read a little bit of how marketing concepts are sold and rebranded, and I've spent a lot
Mhm.
of time over the last probably 4.5, 5 years, now, in learning a lot about how marketing is done. And I know how definitions are pulled out. I know how hashtags are branded. I know how
Mhm.
these things happen, and then it makes you sort of question a lot of popular concepts that people actually are selling, like product led growth, for example, or
Mhm.
any one of these things. And I think there is this tendency of for people who are not as aware to start falling into these definition problems. So I do
Mhm.
feel that they're good, but they're only good to maybe 5 or 10%. The 90 80 90% is the entrepreneur or the person who's doing whatever they're doing. That person has to figure out exactly what needs to be done in that moment for their
Yeah.
situation. I could read as many of your books, right? But in that moment, right,
Yeah.
it's my my health is different, my time zone is different, my suppliers are different, my my situation, maybe my emotional state is different. Maybe maybe I get up in the morning and my I have a fight with a mom, like my mom, for example,
Mhm.
or maybe my dad who's never complimented me but now suddenly compliments me, and that changes the day. And now, so there's so many things at play that I always feel that there are all these romantic versions, that
Mhm.
everybody tries to sort of look at. So my way of looking at this is, I probably cut that out. He doesn't know I'm on a podcast. He's a domestic help that I have. Okay. Um, so my way of looking at this is, you got to know what you want, and I think the smartest players in the room always know what they want, at least to
Yeah.
a very large degree.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the crowd is always looking at the action that's happening. The players really, deep down, they know, okay, fine, it's a performative act. At the end of the day, they know, but what do they want, right? And then they use whatever's out there to make it work for them, whether it's open source, whether it's, I think adding nobility to concepts is something that the crowd does. The people who actually, are in the business of that, they necessarily are not going to fall for it as much. They're
Yeah.
acutely aware that these are concepts that, let's say, it's an idea business. Like a Naval Ravikant, there's no reason why he should be out there propagating ideas, but he knows it's an idea business. He has to have influence over the market through his ideas, and if he does not, right, the relevance of the person goes down, right? The person
Right.
overall, you're not. So I think there is the public version of all of these things, and then there is the real deep down the truth of what is actually there. I like to sort of observe that and then not fall for over it, because I've been younger than what I am right now, and I'm 31, and I was one
Mhm.
of these very young, sort of, let's say, guys who read Richard Branson and this and that. And and then you slowly sort of, I got to so many businesses, and you start learning that, hey, okay, cool, you know what, uh, a lot of this is around knowing what you want and then making whatever is available to you, whether it's capital, whether it's relationships, whether it's
Mhm.
opportunities, and then using it to your advantage to make it work. I think
Yeah.
it's down to that. I think any other thing for me becomes just a concept, and then all the other things that come with that. So that was just me. Thank you for switching the
Well,
podcast over.
I don't mind. Honestly, I'm quite excited to hear that perspective because in a way,
Mm,
um, it sounds quite like a goal alignment thing. We talked about this
mm,
earlier, right? Like when you're most effective at building a relationship when your goals are aligned with the goals of the people that you're building this relationship with. And that,
yes.
like, I completely agree with you that there's a lot of people out there who know what they want and then they
Mm,
utilize
mm.
they utilize whatever is out there to align that with their own goals.
Yes.
And that is just like, I guess, how humans generally see
Mm,
the world and try to manipulate it to their own advantage. It's just how we
sure.
all do it.
Mm,
But if you have a choice, at least
mm,
if I have a choice, I would like to, of course, always have my own goals. I will
mm,
never not have my own goals. I'm never going to be like completely selfless in my work
mm.
because it's my work. It has to fulfill me
Yes.
at first and then be
Mm,
there for other people. But I also would like to align it with other people's needs and goals and wants.
sure.
That's why building public works so well for me, because I can just say, hey, I want to empower people and I want you
Mm,
to empower people, and here's how I do it. So
yeah,
please do the same thing that I do. So in the end, everybody helps other people. Right? That's,
sure.
for me, it's a very easy thing. But obviously, and that's kind of funny that we talk about this now. Good thing I talked about this in the beginning, trying to to move off this guru position and this kind
Yes.
of being honest about my financial incentives in selling books. Because if you hide that from people,
Mm,
like if you turn this into a manipulative act
mm,
instead of a transactional act, like,
mm,
I have this knowledge, I will sell it to you, and
mm,
then you can do whatever you want with it.
mm,
That's honest.
mm.
It's as honest as it can be in a business relationship, and I would
Yes.
like to see more of that. And
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think and people not being ashamed of selling something is a good start to this, because I
Mm,
have this feeling that many people out there are really ashamed of
mm,
asking for money for something that they find valuable. I don't know
Yep.
why it is. I don't really understand it. And there's people out there who are shameless
Yes.
and that's a negative sense, I guess. But it shouldn't be like shamelessness in the sense of I have valuable things. Here is the value equivalent in money. Please give that to me, and you give my thing. That should
Hmm.
be okay in the
Yeah.
digital world as well.
I think it's deep rooted in how society is actually run versus
Yeah.
how entrepreneurs think they're run. And I think this is where you'll start actually observing human behavior, and it's mostly status driven, right?
Hmm.
There's literally no other bigger motivator than status. And I think I don't remember who said this at some point of time. Was it Warren Buffett? I don't remember. Like envy runs the world. Okay, it's like or the need for status, because there's the
Hmm.
I mean, if you look at the basic needs that a human being has, it's very little. It's like the you effectively. I mean, if you want to go into that concept, then it's like, okay, money is a man-made concept. So the question is, you can
Hmm.
end. Everybody can get together one day, end all suffering. Okay, just because they can agree on a common definition of money again, or in some form,
Hmm.
and the poor guys don't are not poor anymore, so they can go and buy the basic things. And but the point is that a lot of that is status driven. A lot of human behavior, how people live their lives beyond commerce, in terms of the existence itself is rooted in status. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of what that is down to that. It is that,
Yeah.
hey, I want to be, that's why nobility will always, so that's why nobility, people like a humble, successful person. But and the reason they like that is because, again, it's a status thing. Is because they
Hmm.
feel more relatable to the person. Otherwise, you have repulsive people who are successful,
Yeah.
and this common average person, right, does not relate to that person, is because that other person is not being like them. Okay, there is this, I'll tell you what, this is actually a thing on Twitter that I think I wrote one day, which was, why is there so much hate on something? Somebody is questioning on Twitter, and I said the reason is because your existence, okay, invalidates their existence,
Hmm.
because you stand for five things which their
Hmm.
existence depends on not being, let's say,
Yeah.
actively propagated. So when you, for example, say that, hey, you should be noble, and let's say, for example, or you should have these, let's say, goodwill intent around what you're doing, there are going to be probably five people who listen to this and be like, what bullshit is that, right? Or what are these guys talking about? Money is just, because it goes completely, it invalidates their existence. So I think a lot of what this is when you talk about making money is, let's say, it's frowned upon and all these things, is it's down to the fact that it sort of invalidates a lot of how people have lived so far. And
Yeah. It is.
yeah, and because usually the money's been made by capitalists before this, right? Again, forget about the last 20, 15, 20 years, go back,
Yeah.
because that's where we're coming from. So I always ignore, when it comes to human behavior, I ignore the 15, 20 years, because I'm like,
Mhm.
this is all deep rooted. Whatever I saw when I was growing up is what I'm actually going to now actually see and do, and interact with the world based on that. So I do feel that a lot of this is driven by status, and there's this sort of frowning upon, is because there is invalidation of the fact that people have been noble about, and have had, let's say, non-commercial interest when they've done their own work, but when they see other people do it, yes, yeah, those are my thoughts around, very complicated, deep rooted thoughts around,
Mhm.
around what's going on. And I think a lot of that is, um, like you said, and I'd love to have your thing on that, in terms of, you like to have an optimistic view on it. Overall,
Mhm.
can you sort of, let's say, um, give us a little bit of that? Like, do you think that shaped a lot of how
Yeah.
you've been operating overall? You think that's important in how you've
Yeah.
done your work and your ventures and all of that?
I think so, and I want to like circle back to something you just said, like about everything being status related.
Mm,
I think that can be a beneficial force as well,
mm,
particularly when you look at niche communities,
mm,
right? Because like if you just go for status in everything you do, like your life, you get a fancy car, you get a fancy house, you get a fancy job, yeah, that turns into this infinite and pointless, or it's a finite game
mm,
because there's only so many cars and houses to go around, and it feels like this treadmill, this hedonistic adaptation kind of situation too. But that doesn't really matter. It's just this: you follow the goals of and dreams of others
mm,
because you don't have your own.
mm,
But if you confine your impact into a smaller subset of topics and problems and communities, if you are active in your niche, I don't know, like bootstrap entrepreneurs or visual designers or something like that, then the status you reach in this community can actually be a positive thing,
mm,
because you can be in that community teaching people how to do the things that they want to do,
mm,
the things that they want to accomplish. You can be a connector between people in the community. You can be a podcast host
mm,
and get people onto your show and interview them, ask really deep and thoughtful, interesting
correct.
questions, and then share that with hundreds and thousands of people
Mm,
and enrich their own lives.
mm,
You can be a person of actual good, like meaningful good impact through your own willingness to get more status
mm,
in that community,
mm,
which we all kind of do, right? We all want to. Yeah. Even though I don't really look at the numbers on
mm,
Twitter, I do look at the numbers on Twitter,
mm,
and I do look at the likes, and I do look at the retweets,
mm,
and I do look at my followers and what they are saying and what they are doing. We're all status driven, but I think we can leverage it in ways that are actually beneficial to the communities in which
mm,
we are. And I've seen this with the people that I have followed in my journey. They were people of great renown, greater renown even over time, right? They got more reputation, they became more important, and their voice held more importance in the community conversation. And I followed them and I learned from them
mm,
and I had success through that.
mm,
So if that is a status game, I would gladly
mm,
play it,
mm,
right? Because it is something that has a an impact on other people's livelihoods in a positive way,
mm,
and that's where my optimism comes from. Because I understand that there's a lot of stuff going on outside of my control,
mm,
that are systems that have been around for decades, if not centuries,
mm,
that are just reinforcing themselves. These are yeah, per self. What is the word? Yeah, systems that just could keep to build themselves out and impact
mm,
things in a society that we wouldn't even think.
mm.
Self-perpetuating systems.
Self-perpetuating.
That's the
Yep.
word, right? That is the stuff that is consistently around us. It's in everything we do,
Mm,
in everything that we, the society, our families, all that kind of stuff. These are systems that have been around and are just still there,
mm,
and we have to live with that.
mm,
But if we have impact
mm,
on one of them,
mm.
and we can actually make a meaningful contribution, then I'm all for that.
Right. I think that it's very important. Like you mentioned that you're clear about your intent, right? I think that's very clear that you really deeply you have this thing that you want this to happen. Like if for example today your Twitter followers go up from 40,000 to 400,000, and you sit there and you are able to, let's say, have 10 days of, let's say, impact and let's say influence over shaping and planting very beautiful ideas in people's minds for
Mhm.
just 10 days, you'll take it, right? You'll be like, okay, cool, and then you can bring my followers back. I don't care, because you've got your
Mhm.
intent very clear, like, which is what we were talking earlier, is you're very clear
Yeah.
about what you want with regards to these things. Otherwise you're not able to, let's say,
Yeah.
produce at this level. So I do agree with you to a large extent, in the
Yeah.
way that you're saying it. But I'm saying that the intent that you want this to happen, right, is far more important than the thing itself. Because I do,
Yeah.
because otherwise we'll start
That's true.
arguing concepts that, hey,
Yeah.
what should a person aim towards becoming, or what should a person aim towards once they're successful and once they've sold a venture or something like what so then we get into this definition business of defining ideals for the people. And I feel what's very, very, very important here to anybody who's listening, and I think our conversation as well, is you want this to happen. And I think for anybody who's listening, or even for you, like that's at the core of what we've been sort of, let's say, talking about, that hey, um, like you are living it in the sense of not somebody else's definition, right?
Yeah.
You've thought this
Yeah.
through a little bit. You've probably had time to reflect, when you were sitting down writing somewhere, and there's this part of you that is sort of defined it a little bit for yourself. And I think that's important when
Yeah.
people are going into the going into the world, and let's say, whether it's entrepreneurship itself, like for example bootstrapping. Should I become bootstrapper? Should I not become bootstrapper? Should not be a question of somebody else defining it for you. You should look at your own
Yeah.
circumstances and decide whether you prefer, do you even want to become an entrepreneur to begin with, or do you
Yeah.
want to even set up a business to begin with. And I think that is something that I really am coming down to. It's down to the individual. And that individuality is risky, right? It's a vulnerable.
Yeah.
It makes you vulnerable, because now you can't blame it on Arvid suddenly to be like, hey, Arvid told me to build in public, right? So
Yeah.
I feel a lot of this is down to that, is take ownership of what you're doing. And if it fails, it fails. But a lot of this is going to be down to what you as an individual want. So 100% agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that the problem is that most of what we've been taught
Mm.
in our educational upbringing is the exact opposite of
Yes.
this. Right? I very strongly remember that taking ownership of my creativity was punished in
Yeah,
school
yeah, yeah.
in many ways.
Mm.
Right? I wrote more words than they wanted me to write,
Mm.
got a failing grade,
Mm.
which is hilarious because somebody just put more effort into the work, and all of a sudden it's not the right shape
Yeah,
and they fail.
yeah.
Or I come up with something that is not supposed to be in the
Mm.
curriculum. Well, it's wrong,
Mm.
like literally.
Mm.
There is a lot of educational unlearning that you have to
Oh yeah.
do to even be able to make those choices for yourself,
Mm.
which is why people go for advice so much,
Yes.
because they know advice in a as a rather safe way of approaching new knowledge in a topic,
Mm.
because it comes with the credentialism
Mm.
of having somebody who's been through it before, or having somebody who has a certificate of some sort or has a doctor's degree or whatever. Right? There's some yeah, easy mode
Mm.
feeling to advice.
Yes.
And obviously, as somebody who gives a lot of advice to people building their own business, either in my consulting or my mentoring or on Twitter in public, I always and strongly always preface it with, you need to contextualize this within your existing
Mm.
life, and even think about why I'm telling you
Mm.
this. Like, what, not just me, anybody who gives you
Mm.
advice, why do they
Mm.
share? What is their intention? What do they share? Is it just experiential? Is it anecdotal? Or is it reflected? Is it something they heard? Like, there are so many layers to how applicable and unapplicable advice can
Mm.
be, that you really need to reflect on it
Mm.
in a contextual sense. You need to contextualize your own life, the life of the person giving it, the career trajectory you want to have, your goals, your aims, your intentions. It's very complicated, and I think most people are just not aware of the fact that they can't just look at the textbook and have it be right, right? Because that's all we've been trained to do
Yep.
from early childhood on,
Mm.
is to take authoritative
Mm.
sources and have them be the truth.
Yep.
Super hard.
No, it's very.
I mean, that may be one of the hardest thing in
Oh
entrepreneurship.
yeah, I think we're born with, and we sort of, let's say, I have this term for it. It's called reference based thinking, and
Yeah.
we do that because it's part of the systems, and it's part of,
Mhm.
oh it's part of discussion. It's how people live their lives. The entire lives are based on that, and we've all been part of that. Okay, why am I wearing a T-shirt? Is because everybody else wears it, right? It's not like I could always wear a cowboy hat, but like, hey, but other people don't. So I don't want to sort of, and there's this entire reference based thing. Why do you want to set up a business? Because you saw this article somewhere that a 16-year-old raised 100 million, and now you're maybe
Yeah.
15 years old, so you feel, hey, you know what, 1 year down the line, let's give it a shot. You see Elon Musk doing
Yeah.
building rockets, and you're like, oh, if he can do it, then and I think there's all of that, that there's this reference based stuff that that is very, very deep rooted in who we are. But I do feel that it's very interesting that all the successful people that I know are rarely reference based thinkers. They
Mhm.
are, you would say that they are reference based checkers of things rather than reference based thinkers. So checkers meaning they
Yeah.
do keep a track of, okay, where am I, like they're very aware of where they are, and all of that. But their reference is based on checking to, okay, am I missing something, is it something I need to add, is it something that I need to, maybe,
Mhm.
is there some other new technology that I need to look at, or maybe an older one, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's based on equipping themselves rather than, or giving them permissions to, sort of do something that somebody else is doing because they saw somebody else do it. So I think
Yeah.
a lot of behavior is rooted in reference based thinking, especially in today's day and age, because it does not, literally today you can go ahead, if you're a developer, and set up, a Vercel or a Netlify. You can deploy one of these fancy, what do you call it, React and whatever, Next.js and all of that stuff. And within,
Mhm.
you have these templates available for free, starter templates available, and now effectively in a week's time, with a little bit of stuff, you're sitting there and you're like, hey, I have something going, right? And the product hunt is
Yeah.
free, so you'll go ahead and do that, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. And I think because it's become so easy to launch things, I do feel that it's all the more amplified that that's why you see a lot of these copycat ventures that come in, because a lot of that is reference based. Hey, I can build that out. Okay, cool, let's
Yeah.
do it. It's maybe not even got to do with copying in the stealing sense. It's got to do with the fact that, hey, if that person's built it, let me also quickly sort of, let's say, I can also build it. And I think there's this permission that people get once they reference to somebody else, which
Yeah, that's right.
drives a lot of behavior. So I do feel that, I mean, especially Twitter and all these places, that people, the more they become aware that they're doing that, the more that their behavior starts to shift, is because then they become a little more measured in, okay, fine, where did this idea come from? I got this idea, but
Yeah.
maybe it came from because you were on product hunt, doom scrolling for 1 hour, and you saw some idea, but now you forgot about it, and 2 weeks later you're like,
Mhm.
let's build something, and now you're like, oh, it's the same thing. So I do feel that reference based is dangerous, but it's also, what do you call it, coping mechanism, and also helpful to a certain extent. But originality in entrepreneurship is especially rewarded. Not being
Yeah.
original in terms of what you create, but having your own problem solving ability
Yes.
is I think very relevant. So all these things can be used, tools and references and people's motivation and this and that. But that's probably, I would say, 5 to 10% of what shapes it. Everything else is like, you have to sit down, assess where you are, how much money do you have, how many customers do you have. You really have to confront the hard problems, and solve in your own way, with as
Yeah.
much help, but solve it in your own way. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what
I just went on.
that's what I might that's what I want. No, but you make perfect sense, and that's what I want my stuff to be. I
Uh,
want my work to be a tool that some people may or may not use.
mm,
Right? They can read my book, they can make up their mind, and they can take the things they want. They don't have to follow it by the word.
yes.
Shouldn't follow it by the word because
Yes.
that's not going to help
Yep.
them. They have to contextualize it. They have to pick and choose. The embedded entrepreneur, the exact same. I mean, it's a 200-page book or
Mm,
something, so you can read it in an hour or two, and then you can think about it, and then you can take what you want. You can leave it all if you want to. It doesn't matter to me. At least you have a perspective on something new,
mm,
or a new perspective on something you already know. And the same is going to be my build in public work. I know that there's a lot of people who out there who are probably going to look at it and say, no, that's not for me.
mm,
And that is great because you've just made a more informed choice. And that's all it needs to be,
mm,
right? I don't want to solve everybody's problem. I just want to give them one additional tool to maybe be better at whatever they want to do.
mm,
And if we all look at our contribution to whatever we're doing this way
mm,
as a potential helpful thing that some people might find
mm,
useful, instead of declaring us to be the end all solution to all
mm,
problems, then I think we have a more iterative, a more reflectable, right, a more inviting more reflection, inviting more discussion, even a more feedback driven
mm,
approach to whatever we're doing, and that probably is much more helpful than any kind of assumption that we know what is right,
mm,
because there is no right in a world that has multiple parallel and equally valid truths
mm,
that people have in their life,
mm,
right?
mm,
So I really appreciate this caution that you
mm,
have in a yeah, a very skeptical kind of way. I appreciate that because we need that. We
mm,
need to have that in
mm,
ourselves when we look at stuff, and we need to have that within the community when new things are
mm.
introduced.
I think,
Otherwise, you have
yeah, go for it. Sorry.
sorry. Otherwise, you have what's happening in the NFT world where
Mm,
people are using the same old
mm,
schemes to get the
mm.
gullible to invest in stuff that is not investment,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
Because if there
yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
why does this happen? We had Ponzi, we had Bernie Madoff, we had
Yep.
these weird leggings,
Mm,
right? Like we had all of this before, and now we have the exact same stuff in a new technology that actually could be good
yep.
for
Yep.
people.
Yeah.
It's just
I
unfortunate.
think I think so. This is the reason with this is specifically that the law is always traced. So I'm a lawyer by, before
Yeah,
I was an
great.
entrepreneur. So I mean, I studied
Okay.
law, and you know the law is always trailing reality. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
so it's always like, how technology that you use today is always old technology in the innovation sense, because in the
Yeah.
innovation sense, you're probably using a 10-year-old technology, maybe 20-year-old technology that was already problem solved before, just that it did not become commercially, let's say, more viable. So it was probably,
Yeah.
not used. So this is the same thing with the legal bit. And I think, with regards to this, that yes, there's going to be, repetition. That's why online is so so hard to sort of, navigate for a lot of people. And that's why a lot of these manipulation, and because you don't know the person who you're actually believing is an American is actually an American. He's probably sitting,
Yeah.
somewhere in Bangladesh, or somebody is in, maybe, I don't know, in London somewhere, but he's posing as an Australian. I don't
Yep.
know who's who. So I think a lot of this is down to, being aware more than cautious. I think,
Mhm.
cautiousness is only, I mean, for dangerous things, yes, but for everything else, I think it's just,
Mhm.
it's just, another tool. Being cautious is another tool to be used. So I absolutely get it. With regards to this, yeah. Very interesting. We went into very,
Right.
very
That
interesting
went
things.
interesting places.
Yes. All right.
Oh man,
Cool. I think we'll do a quick wrap up. Arvid, I usually ask, like, okay, who are some other people that you sort of either like, or get motivated by, or share,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of, let's say, friendliness with, and you learn from, on
Mhm.
Twitter or anywhere else, or who have been the people who you have looked up to. Maybe you could mention a few names. That'll be great.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned a couple of names already. I think we talked about Justin Jackson and
Mm,
his work. That has been very helpful because he's just a nice guy, and
mm,
I like nice people being helpful and still having clear opinions.
mm.
Like he's been very outspoken about not flying because of the carbon footprint and all that stuff, and has made a couple enemies on Twitter because of that. And I quite enjoy it.
Uh,
It's like somebody has an actual opinion
mm,
on something that impacts us all,
mm,
and he stands by it.
mm,
That is really cool.
mm.
So Justin's been and his building in public is building SaaS businesses. He has so much experience. He wrote a book on marketing
Oh
for
yeah.
developers. Like he's
Mm,
been part of the community, helping the
mm,
community for decades at this point.
mm,
It's really nice. Who else do I look up to? Yeah, I mentioned Tyler Tringas. Like Tyler is running the Calm Fund,
mm,
of which I am an investor.
mm,
Gotta caveat that here. But he's been focusing on giving calm, sustainable bootstrap businesses a path forward with funding that is not outrageously VC like,
mm,
right? It is kind of venture capital if you think about it, but on very different
mm.
terms. Allows bootstrap companies to stay bootstrapped and be bootstrapped just with a little financial injection. And that is cool. Tyler sold his business to the same people that we sold our business to.
Okay.
So that's kind of how we connected.
Mm,
And that was just fun. He's fun. He's also done Founder Summit,
mm,
which happened in Mexico a couple of weeks ago, where a lot of founders got a lot of connections
mm,
going because that's what yeah, conferences like that really are about at this point. We learn all the things we need to learn online anyway. We
mm,
don't need to go to
mm,
talks, but just having the actual exchange between founders. That's what he's doing. Yeah, Rob Walling, he's written Start Small Stay Small, great impactful book. He's been running the Startups for the Rest of Us podcast for what is now
yeah,
decades, which
yeah,
is amazing, like
yeah.
the amount of work that he's been doing for the community. Michelle Hansen, you pointed her out.
Mm,
Like she has been one of the most empathetic people that I ever seen work on Twitter, building an empathy-based product in an empathetic way. I just love that. I
mm,
love when people do the thing that they're talking about
mm,
in their work while doing the work. It's just enjoyable,
mm,
right? That's why I built my built in public book in public.
mm,
I write it in public because I just like the thing of the thing to be how it comes to exist as well. Michelle has also a great podcast,
mm,
like the software social podcast that is really nice. It's super enjoyable too. And then the books that I've been reading, like that really started my journey, has been Tim Ferriss 4 Hour Work Week, one
mm,
of the staples that has received a lot of criticism as well. Like Tim Ferriss is not a straightforward person in the community. There's a lot of stuff. Funny enough, I was in Toronto
mm,
just a couple of days ago because I live in Canada now.
mm,
I moved from Germany to Canada, and we went to Toronto just for a couple of days because I had to do something at the German consulate. And we walked down the street, and there was like one of these little book, tiny, yeah, like a little
like a
place
shack.
where people put books there, and
Oh
a
yeah.
little
Okay.
shack,
Yeah.
and where you
Yeah.
could take
Mm.
one. And in there, I found the 4 Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. It was hilarious. Like you know what kind of community you're in if people throw away Tim Ferriss books into the shack. Also, it was hilarious. And
Yeah.
yeah, Tim Ferriss's book gave me this kind of perspective
Mm,
on this is how life could be.
mm,
Because I was in a 9 to 5, I was a software engineer, and I looked at the 4 hour work week and I was like, okay, if I built a business that is highly automated, I could at some point
mm,
not have to work in the business. I could work on the business. And that is kind of what switched that in my mind.
mm,
And from there, I read books like Built to Sell by John
mm,
Warrillow, one of the most mind blowing books in terms of entrepreneurship
mm,
that I ever read, because it really gave me this, oh, this is what I want. I want to
mm,
build a sellable business, and then I want to sell it.
mm,
Maybe I don't need to sell it to have a great business, but if I build a sellable business, then I can sell it and it's going to be amazing.
mm.
And then last recommendation I have is the E Myth, the
Oh
entrepreneurial
yeah.
myth by Michael E. Gerber,
Mm,
which gives you a lot of insight into what a technical person. I'm a software engineer, but
mm,
anybody who comes from a more like functional technical background, what we might be missing on our journey to entrepreneurship
mm,
and how we can compensate for that. That
mm,
is what the E Myth is. And
mm,
I have a thousand more recommendations, but like those are the people that I admire, that I look up to, and I'm interested in. But obviously, I also admire and look up to 11,000 other people on
oh
Twitter.
yeah. Mm,
So everybody that I follow is somebody that I want to see succeed and want to see that journey
mm.
even. So yeah, try to find as many people that are doing interesting stuff and just follow them, look at that journey. So that's kind of my record for that.
Good. This is like good stuff, and I think everyone's generally, just a big shout out to Arvid's work as well. On his website and all the stuff that
Thanks.
he's written. I'm pretty sure that a lot of concepts that he's talking about on the books he's talking about, he's probably covered a bunch of them. In his
Oh yeah.
writing and all of that. So that's actually a. I would probably start there and look for a lot of
Mhm.
these kinds of concepts in your thing, because you're not writing it from a perspective of authoring it. You're writing it from a perspective of sharing what you're learning, and I think that way you're able to actually cover a
Yeah.
lot more, versus if you only keep on hammering one concept. So because if you're hammering one concept, you have to expand on that one concept. But I think if people go
Yeah.
through your solo podcast and if they go through your blogs, they'll actually see that you've not really stayed with one concept for long, because you're running a business and you're doing all these things. So you actually quickly touched upon a bunch, and which is actually good enough for a lot of entrepreneurs overall, or anybody else, marketers, or any other. These days you got creators is another definition. So anybody who's trying to
Mhm.
sell anything or doing any kind of business, I think it absolutely makes sense to start there and then look for all these references. And Arvid, we normally end with asking this question, which is I don't really like asking the question because it puts everybody in a tough spot, but I'm still going to do it. Uh, what's the one thing that whoever's going to listen to this today, tomorrow, whenever, in the future, 100 years from now, whenever, what's the one thing that you would want to tell them today? I'm not a big fan of advice, but if I came to you as a friend, as a brother, as somebody who maybe wants to, let's say, learn from you, it's generic, but maybe something that you feel almost everybody that you meet should know, that you want to give, that sort of, let's say, let them know that, hey, this is, don't miss this thing. Yep, go for it.
Okay. Well, one thing immediately comes to mind, and that's been the underpinning thing of everything that I've been trying to do for the last couple of years, and that's just be kind to other people
Mhm.
and help them help themselves. Really, like encounter every conversation that you're in with a basic level, foundational level of kindness, and also just like always seeing that other people are maybe struggling. They maybe their outlash, or that them lashing out at you is not aimed at you, it's aimed at them.
Mm,
Like it comes from a different place. So whenever you see somebody being negative towards you or somebody else, just embrace your own kindness instead of embracing their aggression.
mm,
And that applied to everything you do, every interaction you have just leads to a better place.
mm,
Honestly, just you are in better relationships. The people you interact with feel better because of you, and from that comes so much good stuff. Like there is this reciprocal stuff that at some point happens when people feel, oh, you've done so much for me, here's something I can do for you.
mm,
Or there's just a feeling that you have from not having felt the aggression that somebody else has thrown at you, but deflected it and giving back the opposite, a positive energy. So just be kind in everything you do and help people. You help people get to a better spot so they can then help other people.
mm.
And I've talked about this before during our now 2 hours of conversation, right? That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to be the person that is nice, friendly, kind, and helps people get to a place where they can be nice, friendly, and kind to other people.
Mm. Done. Boom.
That's really what
That doesn't get better than that. This is classic Arvid Kahl style. All right. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for listening in,
Thanks
everybody.
so much.
Thank you, Arvid.